At Halston's charity gala, 15-year-old Noah Bennett was accused of stealing the library's most valuable book. They dragged him forward. Everyone watched in silence.
You were trusted here.
Conrad wanted a confession.
What did you think would happen?
Noah refused to lie.
I did not steal it.
The room believed Conrad.
Then explain why you were hiding it.
But Noah had found it.
I found it in a crate.
Because the original was missing.
The original never left this library.
Then Evelyn stepped forward.
Don't let them take that book!
She knew the truth. The displayed book was fake.
The book under glass is a forgery.
Conrad finally looked afraid.
Be careful what you accuse me of.
He did not steal history. He found what you buried.
To understand why, go back 6 weeks. 6 weeks earlier, the Halston Heritage Library had not yet become the center of a scandal. It was still only an old public building on the east side of the city, standing between a bus station and a row of stores that changed owners every few years. Its limestone walls were stained by decades of rain. Its copper roof had darkened almost black. In winter, the pipes groaned beneath the floorboards, and in summer, the upper reading room carried the warm scent of dust, cedar shelves, old paper, and leather bindings that had survived longer than most of the people who once touched them. To wealthy people driving past in black cars, the library looked tired. It occupied valuable land near the river, close to luxury apartments, boutique hotels, and polished glass towers that had begun changing Halston beyond recognition. To developers, it was a property with potential. To city officials, it was a budget problem. To men like Conrad Vale, it was an opportunity waiting to be renamed. But to the people who used it every day, the library was something else entirely. Children came after school because it was quiet, safe, and warm. Older men came because they had nowhere else to sit after retirement. Mothers came to use the computers for job applications. Teenagers came to study, read, hide from arguments at home, or simply spend a few hours in a place where no one expected them to explain why life had become difficult. The library did not ask for proof of income. It did not care where a person slept. It did not demand that anyone explain their past before opening its doors. That was why Evelyn Hart had stayed there for so long. At 57, Evelyn had become the kind of woman people overlooked until they needed something only she could find. She was not loud. She did not dress to be noticed. Her gray-brown hair was always pinned neatly behind her head, and she wore thin cotton gloves whenever she handled old paper. Her clothes were simple, practical, and slightly old-fashioned. She moved through the archive rooms with careful, measured steps, as though every shelf held a memory that deserved respect. Officially, Evelyn was the library's senior archival assistant. It was a title that made her sound like someone who spent her days dusting books and filing records. In truth, she knew more about Halston's history than most of the men who gave speeches about it. She could identify a forged signature by the pressure of the ink. She could tell the age of a document by the fibers in its paper. She knew which streets had vanished beneath new construction, which neighborhoods had been renamed by investors, and which public promises had disappeared the moment money changed hands. Evelyn had built her life around those small traces, because 20 years earlier, she had learned what happened when powerful people believed they could erase them. Before coming to the library, Evelyn had been a forensic auditor for the city of Halston. She had worked in the municipal finance office, reviewing redevelopment budgets, public grants, housing contracts, and infrastructure programs. She had been good at her work. Too good, perhaps, for people who preferred financial reports to remain unread. At the time, Halston had been changing quickly. Old neighborhoods near the river were being cleared for redevelopment. Public housing projects were being repaired, relocated, or quietly abandoned. New foundations appeared every year, promising to rebuild struggling communities. Politicians praised private investment. Newspapers printed photographs of smiling developers standing beside ribbon cuttings and construction sites. One of those developers was Conrad Vale. Even then, Conrad had known how to make ambition sound like compassion. He was younger, hungrier, and far less famous than he would become. But the city already admired him. He spoke about restoring dignity to forgotten neighborhoods. He donated coats during winter drives. He appeared at school fundraisers. He made people feel that Halston's future depended on men like him. Evelyn had not disliked him at first. She had only followed the numbers. The more she reviewed the finances connected to the city's redevelopment programs, the more she noticed patterns that made no sense. Public funds intended for housing repairs were being transferred into charitable accounts. Those accounts paid consulting fees to private firms. The firms were connected to contractors. The contractors were connected to land purchases. The land purchases eventually led back to companies linked to Conrad Vale and his earliest business partners. Nothing had been stolen in one obvious act. That was what made the scheme so difficult to see. The money moved in fragments. It passed through foundations with hopeful names. It was hidden inside consulting contracts, administrative costs, redevelopment fees, and emergency transfers. Each transaction looked harmless by itself. But when Evelyn placed them beside one another, a pattern appeared. Public money was being used to help private interests control public land. Evelyn needed proof before she could report it. She needed someone who understood the city's old records, someone who knew where the original deeds and transfer documents had been stored. That person was Arthur Bennett. Arthur had been a municipal records clerk, quiet, patient, and almost invisible to the people who worked above him. He had no powerful friends. He had no political ambition. He was the kind of man who remembered the exact shelf where a file had been placed 15 years earlier, even after 3 office moves and 2 changes in the archive system. Arthur had recognized the same irregularities Evelyn had found. Several land transfer records had been altered. Dates had been changed. Property classifications had shifted after signatures were supposedly completed. Documents had appeared in folders where they did not belong. Some records carried seals that had not existed at the dates printed on them. Together, Evelyn and Arthur had come close to exposing the truth. Then the documents began disappearing. Before Evelyn could deliver her final report, she was accused of manipulating city financial records. The same spreadsheets she had used to uncover fraud were suddenly presented as evidence against her. Money that had vanished through a complicated network of transfers was blamed on her department. The city needed someone to absorb the scandal, and Evelyn was convenient. She was not wealthy. She was not politically connected. She had no family name that could frighten the people accusing her. Arthur tried to defend her. He submitted notes about altered deeds and missing evidence. He insisted that files had been removed from the archive system. But his warnings were dismissed as paranoia. He was removed from his job. His reputation was damaged. Within months, the city had painted Evelyn as a dishonest auditor, and Arthur as a troubled clerk, unable to accept the conclusions of the investigation. Conrad Vale survived untouched. In fact, he emerged stronger. Over the next 2 decades, his company grew. Vale Horizons built luxury towers, shopping centers, private hospitals, and waterfront districts. Conrad funded scholarships. He donated to museums. He sponsored youth programs. His name appeared on plaques across the city. And Evelyn disappeared. She took temporary work restoring documents. She cataloged private collections. She repaired damaged books. Eventually, the Halston Heritage Library hired her because old paper did not care what the newspapers had once said about her. The library was one of the few places where she could work without hearing whispers whenever she entered a room. For 20 years, Evelyn had not tried to fight her past. She had survived it. Then Conrad Vale announced that he wanted to save the library. The proposal arrived with headlines, television interviews, and photographs of Conrad standing beneath the library's stone archway, while promising a new future for Halston's children. Vale Horizons would invest $40 million into a modern educational complex called the Vale Center for Tomorrow. The plan included a technology wing, a media lab, a scholarship center, a renovated children's library, and a sleek glass structure extending toward the river. The city celebrated before most people read the details. The mayor praised Conrad's generosity. The library board called it a miracle. Newspapers described the project as a lifeline for an aging institution that could no longer survive on public funding alone. People who had never visited the library suddenly had opinions about how it should be transformed. But Evelyn saw what the others did not. The agreement required the city to lease the library property to Vale Horizons for 99 years. The library itself would remain open, at least in theory. But much of the surrounding land would be converted into private retail space, corporate offices, luxury cafes, and event halls. The old building would become the decorative center of a much larger commercial project. It would survive as an image, not as a promise. Evelyn understood the danger immediately. A public library did not belong to the city officials who happened to manage it. It belonged to the people who needed it. And once the land was given to a private company for nearly a century, there would be no easy way to take it back. She began studying the legal documents late at night. Most of the agreement had been carefully written by expensive lawyers. But near the end of the planning folder, hidden behind technical maps and development schedules, Evelyn found an amendment dated 1978. It claimed that the original terms of the library's founding agreement had been changed decades earlier, allowing the city to transfer the property for private development under certain conditions. At first glance, the document looked convincing. The language was formal. The seal appeared official. The pages were yellowed enough to suggest age. The signatures looked authentic. It was exactly the sort of paper most people accepted without question, because it looked old and complicated. But Evelyn had spent too long studying the small places where lies failed. The seal at the bottom of the amendment belonged to a municipal archive classification system created in 1986. The paper contained a fiber blend that had not been used in city documents during the 1970s. The typeface was correct for the era, but the spacing between lines matched a template introduced years later. The document claimed to have been filed in 1978, yet the reference number followed a code system that did not exist until the late 80s. Someone had created an old lie using new tools. That night, Evelyn sat alone in her small apartment on Grant Street, surrounded by copied documents and handwritten notes. Trucks rumbled below her window. The laundromat downstairs had closed hours earlier, leaving the building quiet except for the low hum of old machines. A mug of tea cooled beside her lamp, as she compared the forged amendment to real city records. The more she studied it, the more certain she became. Someone was trying to steal the library without calling it theft. The next morning, Evelyn brought her findings to Martin Gage, the library director. Martin was not a bad man. He had spent years trying to keep the library open through funding cuts, staff reductions, and public indifference. He had the tired face of someone who had learned to celebrate every small victory because larger victories no longer seemed possible. Evelyn explained the inconsistencies. She showed him the mismatched archive seal. She pointed out the paper fibers, the date problem, and the wrong filing system. Martin listened. He looked uneasy. He turned the pages slowly. Then he told her that the city legal department had already approved the agreement. Conrad Vale's team had spent months preparing the proposal. The library board had accepted the documents as legitimate. Martin suggested that Evelyn might be viewing the situation through the pain of what had happened to her years earlier. He did not accuse her of lying. That would have been easier. Instead, he implied that her past had made her suspicious of everything. Evelyn left his office without arguing. Downstairs, in the reading room, Noah Bennett was sorting returned books onto a cart. He was 15, thin, dark-haired, and taller than people expected when they first saw him. His clothes were clean but worn. The sleeves of his jacket had frayed at the cuffs, and his shoes had been repaired with black tape near the soles. Noah had been coming to the library for nearly a year. He lived in a foster home on the other side of Halston, with a couple who were doing their best, but already had too many responsibilities. There were other children in the house, too many rules, and not enough quiet. Noah had moved through 4 placements in 6 years. He had learned not to unpack fully. He had learned not to ask whether a room was really his. He had learned that adults often said they wanted honesty, but only when honesty was easy to hear. At the library, no one asked him to explain himself. He volunteered after school. He organized donations, repaired loose book covers, helped older patrons use the computers, and spent hours reading local history. He liked maps, old newspapers, photographs, land records, and anything that revealed how the city had become what it was. He liked history, because history proved that people had existed even when the world tried to forget them. Evelyn had noticed him long before they became friends. At first, Noah had been another quiet boy sitting alone near the window. But then he began asking questions that surprised her. He wanted to know why old books sometimes had handwritten notes in the margins. He wanted to know why city maps showed streets that no longer existed. He wanted to know who decided what was worth preserving. One afternoon, Noah brought Evelyn a small brass key. It was heavy for its size, with a worn oval head and a symbol engraved near the shaft. The symbol looked like a lantern inside a circle. Noah explained that the key had belonged to his grandfather, Arthur Bennett. It was one of only 2 things Noah had left from him, along with an old photograph. When Evelyn looked at the photograph, the past reached out and took hold of her. Arthur Bennett stood beside a younger woman in an office filled with file boxes and folders. The woman wore a navy blouse and had dark hair pulled back from her face. She looked focused, determined, and far less tired than Evelyn remembered feeling during those years. The woman was Evelyn. For several seconds, she could not speak. Noah had never known the full story about his grandfather. He only knew that Arthur had worked for the city, had always spoken about truth, and had died before Noah was old enough to understand why adults avoided mentioning his name. Evelyn turned the brass key over in her gloved hand. The lantern symbol belonged to an old archival system. Before Halston digitized most sensitive records, certain files had been stored in locked cabinets beneath the library. The cabinet numbers were rarely listed in public records. Only longtime municipal employees knew they existed. That evening, after the public rooms closed, Evelyn took Noah down to the lower archive level. The basement corridor was narrow and cold. The lights hummed overhead. The stone walls carried the scent of damp paper and old dust. At the far end of the hallway stood several metal cabinets that had not been opened in years. Most were rusted. Some were sealed with outdated evidence labels. One cabinet bore the same lantern symbol as Noah's key, almost hidden beneath layers of paint. Noah placed the key in the lock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the mechanism turned. Inside, they found a cardboard box tied with brittle twine, several reels of microfilm, a packet of photographs, and a sealed envelope with Arthur Bennett's name written across the front in faded blue ink. Evelyn knew she should have contacted the city archives office immediately. She knew the rules. She knew the procedure. But when she saw Arthur's handwriting, she could not treat the moment like routine paperwork. The envelope contained a letter Arthur had written shortly before his death. It did not include a dramatic confession. It did not name every person involved. Arthur had been too careful for that. Instead, he wrote about fear. He wrote that the evidence they had found had been scattered, altered, and hidden in places no one would think to search. He wrote that Conrad Vale had never feared truth as much as he feared connections. A single document could be dismissed. A witness could be discredited. But if the old records were placed beside one another, they would reveal what had been done. Arthur believed the truth was still alive. It had simply been buried beneath the things powerful people considered worthless. At the bottom of the letter, he had left a sequence of dates, symbols, and file references. Evelyn recognized the system immediately. They were cross-references to municipal filings, redevelopment ledgers, library trust records, and financial documents connected to a charitable foundation that no longer officially existed. The name on the foundation was Vale Community Futures. It was one of Conrad Vale's first philanthropic organizations. Over the following days, Evelyn and Noah worked quietly. Noah helped copy reference codes, organize old files, and compare public records with the materials Arthur had left behind. He did not complain about the boring work. He had Arthur's patience in him, though he did not yet understand how deeply his grandfather had shaped him. Together, they found proof that the library land had never belonged to the city in the ordinary way. The property had been donated in 1912 by Margaret Halston, whose family had funded the original building. Her founding trust included a condition that had slowly disappeared from public summaries over the decades. The land had been given for permanent community use. It could not be sold, leased, transferred, or converted into a private commercial project. If the city ever attempted to do so, ownership would automatically revert to an independent public trust established by Margaret Halston herself. The entire Vale Horizons project depended on that condition remaining hidden, and the condition was recorded inside the original Founders Register. The Founders Register was an enormous leather-bound ledger stored in the library's climate-controlled vault. It contained the names of the original trustees, the first donations, the land agreement, and Margaret Halston's handwritten founding conditions. 3 days after Evelyn and Noah discovered the clause, the library board announced that the Founders Register would be displayed as the centerpiece of the upcoming Halston Heritage Gala. The gala was being promoted as a celebration of the library's future. Conrad Vale would be honored as the man who had saved the building. Donors, politicians, reporters, and business leaders would gather beneath the stained glass ceiling. The original register would be placed under glass as a symbol of the library's history and its bright new beginning. Evelyn read the announcement twice. Then she went to the vault. The Founder's Register was still on its shelf. At first, she almost felt relieved. The leather cover was the right color. The gold lettering appeared worn. The binding carried the same floral pattern. Everything looked exactly as it should. But Evelyn had handled the original register twice before in her career, and she remembered one small detail no copy could easily imitate. Near the lower corner of the true cover was a dark water stain left by the flood of 1947. The book in the vault had no stain. Evelyn stood perfectly still. Someone had already replaced the original. And somewhere inside Halston, Conrad Vale now had the one document that could destroy everything he was trying to build. Evelyn did not touch the false register again until she had taken photographs of every detail that proved it was a replacement. She photographed the smooth lower corner where the flood stain should have been. She photographed the stitching along the spine, too even and too clean for a book more than a century old. She photographed the pages under angled light, revealing fibers that did not match paper made in 1912. Then she went to Martin Gage one last time. This time she did not arrive with a theory. She arrived with evidence. Martin listened behind the closed door of his office, while Evelyn laid the photographs across his desk. Outside, the library remained busy. Children moved through the reading room. A printer hummed near the public computers. Someone laughed softly near the circulation counter. The ordinary sounds made the conversation feel even more unreal. Evelyn explained that the Founder's Register in the vault was not genuine. She explained that the true book contained the original land condition, preventing the library property from being leased for private development. She showed him the forged amendment from 1978 and the archive details that proved it had been created years later. Martin did not deny that the evidence looked troubling, but he was afraid of what the truth would cost. The gala was only days away. Conrad Vale's foundation had already paid for the event. City officials had confirmed their attendance. Newspapers had promised coverage. The library board had built its entire future around the announcement of the Vale Center for tomorrow. If Evelyn was right, the project would not merely be delayed, it could collapse completely. Martin told her that accusing Conrad Vale without official proof would be reckless. He warned that the board would see her actions as sabotage. He said that the city could not survive another public scandal involving the library. Evelyn understood what he was really saying. He believed the library needed Conrad more than it needed the truth. That afternoon, she was placed on administrative suspension. The letter was written in polite language. It claimed that she had accessed restricted material without authorization and caused unnecessary disruption during an important institutional transition. She was instructed not to enter the archive rooms until further notice. For the second time in her life, Evelyn watched a powerful system turn procedure into punishment. The first time, she had been younger. She had still believed that someone would eventually step in and ask what had truly happened. This time, she knew better. She did not argue. She gathered her gloves, her notebook, and the few personal items she kept in her archive drawer. Then she walked through the library without saying goodbye to anyone. Most of the staff avoided looking at her. A few looked sorry. None of them stopped her. That was the part Evelyn would remember most clearly. Not the suspension letter, not Martin's fear, not even the knowledge that Conrad Vale had found a way to rewrite history inside the very building meant to preserve it. What she remembered was how easy it had been for people to remain silent when silence protected them. Noah learned about Evelyn's suspension the following day. He had arrived after school carrying a stack of returned books, unaware that he was no longer supposed to be there. The circulation desk employee told him quietly that his volunteer access had been paused. She would not explain why. At first, Noah thought it was because of Evelyn. Then the security supervisor approached him with a rare 19th century atlas in his hands. The atlas had been found beneath the table where Noah usually studied. It was one of the most valuable items in the special collection. Its pages were delicate, its maps hand-colored, and its cover embossed with the seal of the old Halston Survey Office. It should never have been left in the public reading room. Yet there it was, beneath Noah's chair, as though someone had placed it there specifically to be discovered. Noah said he had never touched it. The supervisor did not accuse him directly. He did something more damaging. He made it clear that the library could no longer trust him around valuable materials. Noah stood in the lobby holding the volunteer badge he had worn for almost a year. Around him, people continued walking past the front desk. Some glanced at him. Most did not. He knew what they saw. A foster kid with worn shoes. A quiet boy without parents beside him. Someone easy to blame because people already believed he probably had a reason to take what did not belong to him. By the end of the day, Noah had been barred from volunteering. He did not tell Evelyn immediately. He waited until evening, then went to her apartment on Grant Street, carrying the suspension letter from the library and the brass key that had belonged to Arthur Bennett. Rain had soaked the shoulders of his jacket. His hair clung to his forehead. He tried to act as though the letter did not matter, but Evelyn saw the way he held it. The library had been one of the only places where Noah had felt wanted without being examined. It had been a place where he could sit beside other people without worrying about whether they knew his history. A place where he could be useful. A place where his questions were welcomed. Now it had become another door closing in his face. Evelyn wanted to tell him that none of this was his fault, but she knew those words would not be enough. Instead, she showed him the evidence she had copied before leaving the archive. The photographs of the fake register, the forged 1978 amendment, Arthur's letter, the notes about the hidden land condition. She told him that the people responsible wanted both of them out of the way because they were getting too close. Noah listened without interrupting. Then he asked the question Evelyn had been trying not to ask herself. If Conrad Vale had taken the real register, where had he put it? The answer came the following morning. Noah had gone behind the library to throw away a bag of old newspapers for his foster mother. Near the recycling bins, he noticed several boxes from Vale Community Futures stacked beside the loading dock. Most were empty packaging from Gala decorations, but one crumpled sheet of paper had blown loose from the top of a bin. It was a delivery manifest. The document listed several crates scheduled to arrive before the Halston Heritage Gala. One crate was marked as historical display material. Another carried a more private label, archival handling, restricted access. At the bottom of the page was a reference code. Noah did not recognize it. But when he brought the manifest to Evelyn, she went pale. The code matched one of the references Arthur Bennett had written beneath his letter. It was not a random number. It was an old city archive designation used for sensitive materials moved without public cataloging. The true founder's register had not been destroyed. It was being transported, and Conrad Vale was planning to bring it into the library on the night of the gala. At first, Evelyn wanted Noah to stay away. She had already seen what Conrad's people were willing to do. They had planted the atlas. They had turned the library staff against him. They had made him look suspicious before he had done anything wrong. But Noah had spent too much of his life being told to sit quietly while adults made choices that changed everything around him. He did not want to be reckless. He did not want revenge. He only wanted to stop someone from erasing the truth, the way Arthur Bennett's truth had been erased. Evelyn understood that feeling better than anyone, so they made a plan. Evelyn would attend the gala even though she had not been invited. She would remain near the public entrance, where the press and city officials would be gathered. Noah would not confront Conrad. He would only look for the delivery crate and confirm whether the original register was inside. If he found it, he would not touch it. He would send Evelyn a message. The plan sounded simple, but nothing involving Conrad Vale had ever been simple. On the night of the gala, the Halston Heritage Library no longer looked like itself. The children's tables had been removed. The public computers were covered in black cloth. White flowers stood in silver vases beneath the marble staircase. A long carpet stretched through the main reading room, where students usually sat with notebooks and tired parents usually searched for work online. The library had become a ballroom. Guests in tuxedos and gowns arrived beneath strings of warm lights. City officials posed for photographs. Donors drank champagne beneath the stained glass ceiling. A small orchestra played near the old reference desk. At the center of the room, beneath a narrow beam of light, the fake Founders Register rested inside a glass display case. Conrad Vale stood nearby in a black dinner jacket, wearing a silver pin shaped like an open book. He smiled for cameras. He greeted politicians by name. He spoke about education, opportunity, and the future of Halston, with the ease of a man who had spent his life learning how to make people believe that wealth and goodness were the same thing. The guests loved him. They saw the billionaire who had promised $40 million. They saw the philanthropist who wanted to save an old library. They saw the man who had built towers, schools, foundations, and a reputation so polished that few people remembered what might be hidden beneath it. They did not see the forged amendment. They did not see the stolen register. They did not see the evidence Arthur Bennett had hidden 20 years earlier. Noah entered through the service corridor shortly before the main speech began. He wore a borrowed navy suit that was slightly too large at the shoulders. The sleeves were long. The shoes hurt his feet. His tie was not perfectly straight. He looked like a boy trying to belong in a room built for people who had never been told that they did not. Near the loading area, behind temporary catering stations and stacks of wine boxes, Noah found the crate marked for private archival handling. The Vale Community Futures logo was stamped across the side. His heart began to race. The crate had been placed behind a curtain beside flower supplies and event equipment. It was not locked. That seemed wrong to Noah. Something so important should have been guarded. But perhaps Conrad had believed no one would ever look there. Noah carefully lifted the lid. Inside, beneath layers of foam and packing paper, was the original Founders Register. He recognized it instantly. The leather cover bore the dark water stain near the lower corner. The binding looked older, heavier, and more fragile than the polished imitation displayed beneath the ballroom lights. For a moment, Noah could only stare. He thought of Arthur Bennett. He thought of Evelyn. He thought of the atlas planted beneath his table. He thought of every time someone had looked at his foster care file before they looked at his face. Then he made the decision that would change everything. He lifted the register from the crate. He intended to carry it only far enough to show Evelyn. He never made it out of the corridor. 2 security guards appeared before he reached the service door. They moved too quickly. They did not ask why he had the register. They did not ask how he found it. They did not seem surprised at all. They took the book from his hands and led him toward the ballroom. At that exact moment, the orchestra began to fade, and beneath the stained glass ceiling, surrounded by donors, politicians, and cameras, Conrad Vale was preparing to tell the city what kind of future he believed it deserved. When the security guards escorted Noah Bennett into the ballroom, the orchestra had just fallen silent. The sound disappeared so suddenly that the room seemed to hold its breath. Hundreds of guests turned toward the boy in the borrowed navy suit. Under the stained glass ceiling of the Halston Heritage Library, Noah looked smaller than he had only minutes earlier. His hands were empty now. The old Founder's Register had been taken from him and held by one of the guards as though it were proof of a crime. Conrad Vale stood near the center of the room, surrounded by donors, city officials, cameras, and people who had spent the evening praising his generosity. He did not rush forward. He did not raise his voice. He understood that real power rarely needed to shout. Instead, he looked at Noah with carefully measured disappointment. To the guests, it seemed obvious what had happened. A foster boy had been found in a private service corridor, carrying the most valuable historical document in the library. The evidence looked simple. The story felt complete. And because Noah was young, poor, unknown, and already viewed with suspicion by people who had never bothered to know him, most of the room had decided he was guilty before anyone asked a single question. No one asked why a frightened 15-year-old would steal a book he could not sell. No one asked why security found him so quickly. No one asked why the original register had been stored inside a crate belonging to Conrad Vale's own foundation. They only saw what Conrad wanted them to see. The billionaire spoke to the room with a sadness that sounded almost compassionate. He described Noah as a young person who had been given an opportunity by the library, by the community, and by the very people gathered there that evening. He made it seem as though Noah had betrayed kindness. He made the guests feel sorrow for him, while quietly convincing them that he could not be trusted. It was a performance Conrad had perfected over decades. He knew how to make cruelty look like concern. Noah stood still beneath the stained glass ceiling, his face pale and his shoulders tense. He had spent years learning that when adults had already made up their minds, speaking too much could make things worse. So he said nothing. He only looked toward the rear entrance of the ballroom. That was when Evelyn Hart stepped into the room. She was not dressed like the other guests. She wore a simple dark coat over a plain dress. Her gray-brown hair was pinned neatly behind her head, and beneath one arm she carried the leather portfolio containing every piece of evidence she had managed to collect before Conrad's people pushed her out of the library. For a moment, no one noticed her. Then Conrad Vale did. His expression changed only slightly. It was small enough that most people missed it. But Evelyn saw the shift in his eyes. For the first time that night, the man who had controlled every detail of the gala looked uncertain. Evelyn walked past the donors, the board members, the city officials, and the photographers. She moved without hurry, but she did not hesitate. She had spent 20 years avoiding rooms like this one. 20 years allowing people to remember her as the woman who had supposedly betrayed the city. 20 years carrying the knowledge that the truth had been buried because no one important wanted to hear it. But this was no longer only about her. It was about Noah. It was about Arthur Bennett. It was about a library that had been built for people who had nowhere else to go. Evelyn stopped beside Noah and looked directly at the Founder's Register in the guard's hands. Then she looked toward the glass display case in the center of the ballroom. Inside the case, beneath a narrow beam of warm light, rested another version of the Founder's Register. The guests did not understand what they were seeing. Two old leather books could look nearly identical from a distance, but Evelyn did not need to touch them to know which one was real. The register beneath the glass was the forgery. The book Noah had found was the original. Evelyn told the room that Noah had not stolen anything. The real founder's register had been removed from the library vault and replaced with a false copy. Noah had found the original book hidden inside a crate, marked for private archival handling, a crate delivered by Vale Community Futures. A ripple moved through the crowd. Conrad responded calmly. He suggested that Evelyn was making another accusation without proof. He reminded the guests, in careful and indirect language, that she had once been involved in a financial scandal with the city. He wanted the room to remember her as a disgraced former auditor, not as the woman standing before them with evidence. It was the same weapon he had used 20 years earlier. But Evelyn had not come unprepared. She opened her portfolio and placed several photographs on a nearby table. The first showed the original register's old water stain, the dark mark near the lower corner of the leather cover caused by the Halston flood of 1947. The second showed the book currently displayed beneath the glass, smooth and spotless in the exact place where the stain should have been. The third showed the forged 1978 amendment that had supposedly allowed the library land to be leased to Vale Horizons. Then Evelyn began explaining the details. The register in the display case had been made with modern leather. Its gold edges had been chemically aged. Its thread stitching was too regular, too clean, and too new. The paper inside carried a watermark from a mill that did not exist in 1912. The pages had been machine-trimmed, while the original book's pages were uneven because they had been cut by hand. To many people in the room, those differences seemed small, but small details were often where lies failed. Evelyn pointed toward the register Noah had found. The true book carried the old flood stain. Its leather had darkened naturally over more than a century. Its binding was heavier. Its paper showed the irregular fibers of handmade archival stock. Every mark on it told the story of time. The forgery only told the story of someone trying to erase that time. A woman near the front stepped forward. Her name was Dr. Maya Collins, a historical preservation professor from Halston University. Conrad had invited her to the gala because he expected her to praise the renovation project and speak about the importance of preserving the library's heritage. Instead, she examined Evelyn's photographs, then looked carefully at the book beneath the glass, and finally turned toward the register held by security. Her expression tightened. She confirmed that Evelyn was correct. The book in the display case was not the original founder's register. It was a reproduction. The ballroom changed in an instant. Until that moment, Conrad Vale had controlled the story. He had been the benefactor. Noah had been the thief. Evelyn had been the bitter former employee trying to ruin a charitable evening. But now, with one expert confirmation, the entire room had to consider another possibility. What if the boy had been telling the truth? What if the woman they had dismissed was right? What if the man they had spent years admiring was hiding something far worse than a forged book? Conrad tried to regain control. He suggested that the reproduction might have been created for preservation purposes. He implied that his foundation had simply handled the materials incorrectly. He said the original register may have been moved without his knowledge. But Evelyn placed the delivery manifest beside the photographs. It showed the private archival crate scheduled through Vale Community Futures. The reference number matched one of Arthur Bennett's old archival codes. Then Evelyn revealed the photograph Noah had found online, taken earlier that evening by a catering employee. In the background, clearly visible behind the flower arrangements, was the crate being moved into the loading area by a Vale Community Futures staff member. The register had not been misplaced. It had been hidden. And it had been hidden by people connected directly to Conrad Vale. Noah finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the room because no one else moved. He explained that he had found the real register inside the crate. He said he had recognized the water stain because Evelyn had described it to him. He did not claim to understand every detail. He did not try to sound brave. He simply told the truth. And because he did not ask for sympathy, the truth sounded stronger. For the first time that night, the guests looked at Noah differently. They no longer saw a foster boy caught with stolen property. They saw a child who had been placed at the center of a lie. Evelyn asked the guard to place the real founder's register on the table. Dr. Collins put on archival gloves. Evelyn did the same. Together, they opened the heavy leather cover. The first pages contained the names of the original trustees, the handwritten donations that funded the building, and the founding records of the library. The ink had faded from black to brown, but it was still readable. The pages were delicate, but they carried the weight of a century. Then Evelyn turned to the section that mattered most. There, in Margaret Halston's original handwriting, was the condition that Conrad Vale had tried to erase. The land beneath the library had been donated for permanent public use. It could not be sold, leased, transferred, or converted into private commercial property. If the city ever attempted to use the land for private development, ownership would automatically revert to the Halston Community Trust. The Vale Center for Tomorrow had been built on an illegal promise. The 99-year lease Conrad planned to use was invalid. His $40 million donation had never been a rescue plan. It had been the first step in taking control of land that did not belong to him. The room became quieter than before. Somewhere near the back, a glass touched the floor and shattered. But the biggest revelation had not yet arrived. Evelyn had spent days studying Arthur Bennett's letter. She had understood that his codes were more than references to missing files. They were instructions. Arthur had hidden something inside the one object Conrad would never dare destroy openly. Near the back cover of the Founder's Register, beneath a narrow strip of worn leather, Evelyn found an old stitched seam. It had been repaired after the flood decades earlier. To anyone else, it looked like ordinary restoration work. But Arthur had known the library well. He had known that old repairs were often ignored because people assumed they had no importance. He had trusted that one day, someone would understand the clue he had left behind. Evelyn carefully loosened the seam. Inside the spine of the register was a folded packet wrapped in wax paper. The packet had been hidden there for 20 years. Evelyn opened it slowly. Inside were 3 things. The first was a notarized statement written by Arthur Bennett. In it, he described how he and Evelyn had uncovered altered land records, falsified redevelopment contracts, and diverted public funds linked to Conrad Vale's earliest business operations. The second was a duplicate ledger containing transaction codes that matched the irregularities Evelyn had discovered before the city accused her of fraud. The third was a list of account numbers, shell companies, transfer dates, and financial references connecting Vale Community Futures to the same network of accounts that had existed 20 years earlier under different names. The past had not disappeared. Arthur had preserved it. He had hidden it inside the very book Conrad had tried to replace with a beautiful lie. Conrad reached toward the table. It was only a small movement, but everyone saw it. Until that moment, he had remained composed. Men like Conrad Vale did not collapse the way ordinary people imagined. They had spent too many years practicing dignity in public. But when he saw Arthur's statement in Evelyn's hands, the color left his face. He knew exactly what the documents meant. The forged amendment connected to the false register. The false register connected to the illegal lease. The lease connected to Veil Horizons. The ledger connected to the redevelopment fraud from 20 years earlier. And the old case against Evelyn Hart was no longer a forgotten scandal. It was evidence. The ballroom did not erupt at once. At first, people simply stared. The mayor stepped away from Conrad. The library board chair lowered her glass. Reporters began moving closer, their phones raised, their cameras recording. Dr. Collins continued examining the documents. Her silence carried more weight than any dramatic announcement. Then someone from the city attorney's office stepped forward and requested that the founder's register, Arthur's statement, the ledger, and all related transfer documents be secured immediately. The gala was suspended. The auction never began. Conrad tried to speak privately with the board members, but privacy had disappeared from the room. The donors who had praised him all evening were suddenly eager to distance themselves. The officials who supported the lease began insisting that they had trusted the legal review process. The people who had benefited from Conrad's power discovered that they had never really known him. That was not entirely true. Some of them had known enough. They had simply decided that knowing was less important than staying close to him. Noah was released from security custody before the police even arrived. The guards apologized in the stiff, uncomfortable way people apologized when they realized they had treated a child like a criminal because it was easier than questioning a wealthy man. Noah did not say much. His hands were still shaking. Evelyn stood beside him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Noah looked at the old photograph Evelyn had brought in her portfolio. Arthur Bennett stood beside the younger version of Evelyn, both of them surrounded by file boxes and records that no one had wanted to believe. For the first time, Noah understood that his grandfather had not died as a forgotten man. Arthur had spent his final years protecting the truth for people he would never live long enough to meet. And Evelyn understood something too. Arthur had trusted the future more than he had trusted the present. He had hidden the evidence because he believed that someday, someone would be brave enough to find it. The first headlines appeared before midnight. By morning, Halston was no longer talking about Conrad Vale's donation. It was talking about forged documents, hidden ledgers, a stolen historical register, and a foster boy who had been accused of theft while holding the evidence that could expose one of the city's most powerful men. The investigation did not end in a single night. Real justice rarely does. For weeks, state auditors examined records connected to Veil Horizons, Veil Community Futures, and several companies that had been created and dissolved over the past 2 decades. Investigators reopened the case against Evelyn Hart. Former city employees were interviewed. Some had been too afraid to speak years earlier. Some had seen files disappear. Some had been pressured to revise dates, remove pages, or approve financial transfers they did not understand. One former accountant described being told that certain payments should never be questioned because Conrad Vale had influential friends. Another employee from Veil Community Futures provided internal emails showing that the original founder's register had been moved without library authorization. A retired clerk confirmed that Arthur Bennett had warned the city about altered deeds long before he was dismissed. The deeper investigators looked, the more they found. Conrad Vale had not built his entire empire through fraud. That was what made the truth even more disturbing. His businesses had been large enough, successful enough, and respectable enough on the surface to hide the parts that were not. He had used real projects, real donations, and real public goodwill as cover for a pattern of manipulation that had begun long before most people at the gala knew his name. The library lease was canceled. the city was forced to acknowledge that the land could not be transferred for private benefit. The Halston Community Trust took legal control of the property under Margaret Halston's original founding condition. The old building would remain public. Conrad's commercial development plan was abandoned. His foundation board removed him from leadership. Major donors withdrew support. Politicians who had once praised him began claiming they had been deceived. His company lost contracts. His reputation, built carefully over decades, began to collapse under the weight of documents he had assumed no one would ever find. Months later, Conrad Vale was charged with document forgery, financial fraud, obstruction of a public investigation, conspiracy to manipulate municipal records, and the false accusation of a minor. He was not destroyed because someone shouted louder than he did. He was destroyed because the records he had ignored finally spoke louder than his reputation. That was the poetic justice of it. Conrad had spent his life believing that buildings were valuable only when they could be turned into profit. He had looked at the library and seen land waiting to be claimed. He had looked at old documents and seen clutter. He had looked at Evelyn Hart and seen a woman whose name could be buried. He had looked at Noah Bennett and seen a boy nobody would defend. But in the end, the old library became the place where his lies were exposed. The papers he considered useless became the evidence that ended his control. The woman he thought he had ruined became the person who restored the truth. And the boy he called a thief became the reason the truth survived long enough to be found. Evelyn's exoneration came quietly. There was no parade, no grand television special, no famous speaker standing beneath the stained glass ceiling. Instead, the city attorney's office released a formal statement confirming that the case against her had been built on manipulated evidence and incomplete records. Her name was cleared. Her professional license was restored. The city issued an apology that was far too brief for 20 years of damage. But it was more than Evelyn had once believed she would ever receive. Martin Gage visited her several weeks later. He looked older than he had before the gala. He admitted that he had failed her. He had wanted to protect the library, but in doing so, he had protected the people trying to take it away. He had confused caution with integrity. Evelyn did not forgive him easily. She did not need to. Forgiveness was not pretending that nothing had happened. She made him understand that institutions were not saved by avoiding conflict. They were saved by refusing to abandon the people who tried to protect them. Martin stepped down as library director at the end of the year. The Halston Community Trust asked Evelyn to return as director of public archives and historical preservation. At first, she hesitated. The title felt too large. The office felt too close to the life she had once lost. But Noah reminded her that the library had never needed someone who looked important. It needed someone who understood what was worth protecting. So Evelyn accepted. The first project she approved was the restoration of the lower archive wing. The second was the creation of the Arthur Bennett Reading Room. It was not a grand hall with marble plaques and expensive furniture. It was a warm, bright room on the first floor where children could read, study, use computers, ask for help with schoolwork, and learn how to search public records. A framed photograph of Arthur Bennett hung near the entrance beside a small brass plaque describing him as a city records clerk who had protected the truth when few others would. Noah attended the opening ceremony in a suit that actually fit. He did not become a millionaire. He did not suddenly inherit a mansion or receive some impossible reward that solved every problem in his life. His foster care situation did not magically become easy. There were still forms, meetings, uncertainty, and memories that could not disappear because one wealthy man had finally been exposed. But Noah was no longer alone. The library hired him as a paid youth archive assistant. He learned how to preserve paper, repair damaged bindings, search municipal databases, and trace the history of buildings that other people passed without noticing. He began taking evening classes through a local college program. For the first time, he had adults who did not see him as a file number or a problem waiting to happen. He had a place where his curiosity was not treated like trouble. He had a future that did not depend on someone else deciding whether he deserved one. Nearly a year after the gala, Noah returned to the lower archive room where Arthur's letter had been found. Evelyn was there, sorting a box of newly cataloged documents. The old brass key rested in Noah's palm. For a long time, he looked at it without speaking. Then he placed it inside a small display case beside Arthur's photograph. The key had once represented a locked past. It had been the only thing Noah carried from a grandfather he barely remembered. But now it meant something different. It was no longer a reminder of what had been hidden. It was proof that some doors stayed closed only until the right person found the courage to open them. The Halston Heritage Library remained standing. The roof was repaired, but not with Conrad's money. Community groups raised funds. Former students returned to donate. Local businesses contributed without demanding that their names be carved into stone. The city restored public support after learning, through humiliation, that libraries were not private charities for the wealthy to rescue. They were public promises. And every day, people continued coming through the library's doors. Children came to read. Parents came to fill out job applications. Older patrons came to sit by the windows. Teenagers came to study or hide from the rain. Most of them never knew every detail of the scandal that had saved the building. They did not need to. The lights were on. The shelves were full. The doors remained open to anyone. That was enough. But Evelyn never forgot the lesson hidden inside Arthur Bennett's letter. Truth does not disappear because it is weak. Sometimes it disappears because powerful people train everyone else to look away. They make doubt feel embarrassing. They make questions feel dangerous. They make ordinary people believe that wealth, confidence, and public applause are the same thing as goodness. But they are not. And in the end, it took a quiet archivist, a foster boy everyone was ready to blame, and a book full of forgotten pages to remind an entire city that dignity does not belong only to those who can afford to defend themselves. Sometimes the people treated as invisible are the only ones still paying attention. Sometimes the things everyone calls old are the only witnesses that never lie. And sometimes justice begins the moment one person decides that silence has lasted long enough. If you believe that truth deserves to be protected, even when powerful people try to bury it, share this story and tell us what you would have done if you had been in that room. At dawn, Arthur Vale stood near Hangar 12 with an old blue toolbox at his feet. His old tools made them doubt him.
We will continue without your advice.
To Arthur, the aircraft was already telling a different story.
The right side sounds different.
Arthur trusted the sound. He had heard that pattern before,
They missed the first sign.
hidden beneath the calm rhythm of metal and engines. Mara Ellison noticed what the others ignored.
What did you hear?
Arthur was not guessing. He was listening.
The pulse comes first.
Then he heard it again. A small change. A familiar rhythm.
There. That is the sound.
A warning no screen had explained yet. And before anyone understood why that brass mirror mattered, the moment had already become the beginning of the truth. Only later would that mirror matter. Later, people would understand what that moment meant. They would see the billionaire stepping over the old mechanic's mirror and recognize the cruelty in it instantly. They would understand that Julian Mercer had not only stepped over a tool, he had stepped over experience, warning, poverty, and truth. But at that moment, outside the fence of Hangar 12, nobody saw the symbol. They only saw an old man being dragged away from an aircraft he had no permission to touch. The only person who did not laugh was Mara Ellison. Mara was not an engineer or a mechanic. She was an operations coordinator, the kind of employee important men rarely noticed until something went wrong. She handled access badges, schedules, vendor records, inspection rooms, maintenance logs, and all the quiet details that allowed Mercer Aerotech to look organized from the outside. She had worked there for 11 years, long enough to know the difference between a company that talked about safety and a company that truly listened to warnings. And the look on Arthur Vale's face bothered her. He did not look like a confused old man. He did not look like someone trying to cause trouble. He looked like a man who had heard danger before anyone else recognized it. Even after Julian humiliated him, even after the guards dragged him away and his tools scattered across the concrete, Arthur kept looking past the people and toward the aircraft. That was what Mara could not forget. Most people, when insulted that publicly, would stare at the person who hurt them. Arthur looked at the machine. After security left him near the service road, Mara found him kneeling beside the curb, placing his tools back into the dented blue box one by one. He did not seem surprised when she approached. Men who spend their lives around failing machines often know when something is coming before it arrives. She asked how he knew about the right wing. Arthur did not give her a resume. He did not defend his pride. He only explained what he had heard. The engine note was clean, he said, but beneath it there had been a second rhythm, a small pulsing tremor that did not match fan speed, hydraulic cycling, or actuator movement. When the warnings appeared, they appeared in the wrong order for a software fault. Something physical was lying to the control system before the control system began protecting itself. Mara had listened to expensive consultants talk for 3 weeks. They used larger words than Arthur, but Arthur made more sense. Then she asked what would happen if Julian ran the test again. Arthur looked toward the hangar and said the aircraft would probably shut itself down again. But the repeated false response could begin stressing a secondary hydraulic isolation valve. If Mercer replaced that valve afterward, without finding the original source, the jet might pass one clean test and still carry the hidden fault into the air. That answer frightened Mara because it did not sound dramatic. It sounded practical. Inside the hangar, Julian was already demanding another run. Mara had a choice. She could return to her desk. She could tell herself she was not qualified, not responsible, and not brave enough to risk her job for a stranger. She could do what people inside large companies learn to do when instinct warns them, but their paycheck tells them to stay quiet. She could wait until the failure became undeniable and then claim she had never known enough to act. But silence, she had learned, was not neutral. Sometimes silence was only obedience wearing a safer name. So she brought Arthur back in. She did not make a scene. She used an old parts corridor, a canceled vendor badge, and a maintenance observation room no executive had visited in months. Arthur clipped the borrowed badge to his old jacket without even reading the name. He had spent most of his life in places where the label on a person's chest mattered less than whether that person could hear when a machine was in trouble. From the observation room above the hangar floor, Arthur watched the next test begin. Below them, the Meridian X7 came alive again. Dr. Evan Rusk, Mercer Aerotech's Vice President of Advanced Systems, stood near the main diagnostic station with the calm posture of a man who believed every room belonged to him. Rusk was not foolish, and that made him dangerous. For 3 weeks, he had guided the investigation towards software anomalies, supplier defects, and isolated sensor failures. He had dismissed early concerns about vibration near the right-wing route, not by destroying them, but by burying them under categories that made them look unimportant. Arthur did not know all of that yet, but he knew the type. Aviation had always had men who believed truth could be managed politically. They treated machines as if machines cared about schedules, investors, reputations, or titles. But aircraft do not care about any of those things. A hidden fault does not become safer because a billionaire needs a demonstration flight. Sooner or later, the machine demands payment. As the engines rose, Arthur placed one hand lightly against the metal frame of the observation window. He was too far from the aircraft to diagnose by touch, but vibration travels through structures in patterns most people never notice. Mara watched his face. His eyes narrowed before the first alarm appeared. He knew before the screens knew. Then the warnings returned. This time, a new message appeared beneath the others. The secondary hydraulic isolation response had delayed. Mara felt the air leave her lungs. Arthur had predicted it. On the hangar floor, Rusk immediately recommended replacing the hydraulic isolation valve and related module. It sounded decisive. It sounded expensive. It sounded like progress. But Arthur's expression tightened. To him, the new warning was not the cause. It was only the bruise left by the original injury. He asked Mara for the maintenance records from the last major modification near the right wing. Mara hesitated only once. Then she opened the files. 6 months earlier, the Meridian X7 had undergone a luxury cabin refit, acoustic upgrades, environmental system changes, and structural access work near the wing carry-through. The work had been finished ahead of schedule. Every inspection box had initials. Every approval line looked clean. Too clean. Arthur searched not for what was written, but for what should have been written and was missing. He saw vague language where precise torque confirmation should have appeared. He saw a late-night sign-off from a technician ID used on overlapping work. He saw a photo attachment briefly flagged as non-conforming, then marked resolved. When the photo opened, Mara thought it looked ordinary. Arthur did not. The image showed a vibration-dampening bracket near the lower right-wing root. Beneath one edge sat a thin shim, a spacer inserted where the bracket should have seated flush. To a casual eye, it was almost invisible. To Arthur, it was the kind of shortcut that turns a small alignment issue into a hidden amplifier. Under light load, the assembly would behave. Under rising thrust, vibration could travel through the shim, reach the nearby control feedback harness, and create a false stabilizer signal. The computer would believe the aircraft's tail surface had moved when it had not. The hydraulic system would try to correct a lie. The correction would create pressure disturbances and thermal echoes. The screens would show unrelated warnings because the aircraft was reporting symptoms from a hidden cause. The experts had been chasing ghosts. Arthur had found the grave. Then he saw the reference number attached to the retrofit kit, and his hand went still. Project Larkspur. Mara noticed the change in him immediately. Until that moment, Arthur had been focused, tired, and steady. Now something old moved behind his eyes, something heavier than a technical problem. Project Larkspur was not just a design file, it was a wound. 16 years earlier, Arthur Vale had been one of the best practical maintenance minds in an experimental aviation program studying vibration and control feedback. He did not have the highest degree in the room, but he often found the fault first. He could hear a bearing starting to fail before a sensor trend caught it. He could feel through a wrench when a bracket was seating wrong. Back then, people listened. Then a prototype aircraft suffered a serious control anomaly during a storm approach. The official investigation blamed improper maintenance oversight. Arthur was the senior mechanic on paper, and paper mattered more than truth when frightened executives needed a simple conclusion. He lost his certification, his job, his reputation, and eventually the house he had shared with his wife, Evelyn. He tried to appeal, but records went missing. Raw data was withheld, and legal letters arrived faster than hope. When Evelyn became ill, he chose medicine over lawyers. After she died, the last person who fully believed him was gone. For 16 years, Arthur lived as the man officially blamed. Now the same family of vibration control ideas had returned inside Mercer's flagship jet, carrying the same kind of warning he had once tried to explain. Mara did not know the whole story, but she could feel its weight. She printed the inspection photo before the system locked the record again. Arthur took the brass mirror from his toolbox and wiped it with his sleeve. Then he told her they needed to open the right wing panel before Rusk replaced the hydraulic module and buried the evidence beneath a false repair. Getting to the aircraft was easier than it should have been. In large companies, everyone assumes someone else has checked the person walking with purpose. Mara carried a clipboard. Arthur carried a toolbox. Together, they looked official enough to cross half the hangar before anyone questioned them. At the right wing root, Arthur knelt with effort. His knee stiffened badly, but he did not complain. Pain had become background noise long ago. He loosened the panel fasteners and angled the brass mirror into the narrow space behind the structure. There it was, the shim. The bracket showed faint fretting marks where vibration had worked against the support. The nearby control feedback harness had a polished gray shine along its outer insulation. Not cut, not failed, but rubbed and compressed by repeated contact. It was exactly the kind of damage that could escape a standard continuity test and still corrupt a signal under load. Arthur did not celebrate being right. Good mechanics do not celebrate danger. Then Dr. Evan Rusk saw him. At first, Rusk did not shout. He did not need to. His body simply went still near the diagnostic station. His eyes fixed on the open panel, on the old man kneeling beside the right wing root, on the brass mirror angled into the dark space where no unauthorized person was supposed to look. For one brief second, the calm professional mask slipped from his face. What appeared beneath it was not confusion. It was fear. Julian Mercer followed Rusk's gaze and turned toward the right wing. His expression changed so quickly that several mechanics stepped back before he even spoke. Less than an hour earlier, Julian had ordered the old man dragged away from the fence. Now that same old man was inside the hangar, beside the flagship aircraft, holding the kind of evidence that could turn an engineering failure into a corporate scandal. Julian crossed the hangar floor with security behind him. He accused Arthur of trespassing. He accused Mara of violating restricted access. He accused the mechanics nearby of allowing a dangerous breach near a multi-million-dollar aircraft. He did not ask what Arthur had found. He did not look into the open panel. He only understood one thing. A man he had humiliated was now standing too close to the truth. Arthur rose slowly. His knee made the movement difficult, and the hangar saw that too. He did not look powerful. He looked like an old mechanic who who had spent too many years carrying pain quietly. But behind him, the open panel spoke louder than status. The shim was there. The rubbed harness was there. The fretting on the bracket was there. The aircraft had hidden the answer in plain structure, and Arthur had found it. Rusk stepped in with careful timing. He did not deny the shim. That would have sounded defensive. Instead, he framed the discovery as contaminated. Arthur had no active certification, no authorization, and no chain of custody protection. Once an unauthorized outsider opened the panel, Rusk said, no one could know whether the harness had been disturbed or whether any evidence inside could be trusted. Then he used the word that made the hangar colder. Sabotage. He did not say Arthur had done it. He only said the company had to consider the possibility. A disgraced former mechanic with a personal history involving aircraft control failures had entered the facility under false credentials and accessed a critical system area. The sentence was polished, cautious, and poisonous. A broken aircraft was complicated. A saboteur was easy. Mara felt the room shift. She understood what Rusk was doing. He was not trying to prove Arthur wrong. He was trying to make Arthur unusable. If Arthur became a contamination risk, the evidence could be delayed. If he became a possible saboteur, his warning could become motive. If Mara became the employee who let him in, her concern could be framed as recklessness instead of courage. Arthur had seen this kind of burial before. 16 years earlier, the words had been different, but the shape was the same. Improper maintenance oversight, failure to verify, inadequate detection, terms clean enough for reports, heavy enough to crush a life. Back then, men in quiet rooms had taken a complicated failure and arranged it until it pointed at the person least able to fight back. But this time, Arthur was not alone outside the fence. Cal Benton, an older Mercer mechanic, stepped closer to the open panel. He looked at the shim, then at the harness, then at Rusk. Cal had worked around aircraft too long to pretend the old man had invented what they were seeing. He had laughed earlier, not because Arthur was funny, but because fear and exhaustion had made him weak. Now he had seen enough. Cal said the panel should be photographed as found and tested before anything was replaced. Arthur's theory could be checked safely, without running the engines. A controlled vibration trace at the wing root, while monitoring the feedback harness and hydraulic response, would show the order clearly. If Arthur was wrong, the data would clear the concern. If he was right, the false signal would appear before the hydraulic dip. Rusk rejected the test too quickly. That was his mistake. In a technical room, speed can reveal fear. Another mechanic said the test would take less than 15 minutes. A younger technician admitted that vibration near the right wing root had been mentioned during the first week, but the concern had been redirected towards software. Someone else remembered an inspection note that disappeared from the active troubleshooting package after Rusk reviewed it. Truth entered the hangar trembling, but it entered. Julian sensed control slipping away. He hated it. But there were too many witnesses now. Too many eyes on the open panel. Too many mechanics beginning to understand that the old man had found the physical origin of a failure their screens had only translated into symptoms. If Julian refused the test, it would look like fear. So he allowed it, but only after warning that when the test proved nothing, Arthur would be removed. Mara would face consequences, and the company would treat the breach with full seriousness. Arthur did not react. He stepped back and let licensed Mercer technicians place the sensors. That mattered. He did not need to touch anything else. He had already shown them where to look. Now the machine itself would speak. The vibration unit was attached near the right wing root. The feedback harness was monitored. The hydraulic isolation response was tracked. The main screen displayed all 3 traces in sequence. Rusk stood near the diagnostic station, his arms folded, his face professionally blank. Julian stood beside him, ready to turn the old man's failure into a lesson for everyone watching. Mara remained near the tool cart, holding the printed inspection photo like a fragile shield. For the first few seconds, nothing happened. The traces stayed calm. A few executives near the glass offices exchanged looks, already preparing to believe this had all been an embarrassing waste of time. Rusk's posture loosened by a fraction. Julian's mouth tightened into the beginning of satisfaction. Then the frequency increased. A small ripple appeared on the feedback line. It was subtle, almost nothing. The kind of signal that would have been dismissed as noise if no one had known to watch for it. But Arthur's eyes did not leave the screen. The ripple sharpened. The stabilizer feedback channel flickered, showing a disagreement that lasted barely long enough to register. 3 seconds later, the hydraulic isolation response delayed. Then the same chain of ghost warnings began to form in miniature. The order was undeniable. The false stabilizer signal came first. The hydraulic dip came second. The thermal spike came third. The room went silent. It was not the silence of confusion anymore. It was the silence of a lie losing protection. The aircraft had repeated Arthur's theory in front of the people who tried to mock it out of existence. The computer hadn't failed first. The hydraulic system hadn't failed first. The software had not invented the problem. The first wrongness came from the area Arthur had named while standing outside the fence. Julian stared at the data as if wealth could make numbers rearrange themselves. Rusk recovered faster. He said the result was interesting, but not conclusive. It still did not prove when the shim was installed. It did not prove the harness condition existed before Arthur opened the panel. He tried to pull the room back into uncertainty, back into procedure, back into fog. Then Mara placed the archived inspection photo onto the main screen. The same bracket appeared, the same shim, the same harness routed too close. The timestamp was 6 months old. Arthur could not have planted a shim 6 months before he entered the hangar. He could not have damaged a harness in a photograph taken long before anyone knew his name. He could not have invented the sequence that the vibration trace had just reproduced. The sabotage theory collapsed under the cold simplicity of time. Then Mara enlarged the approval section of the file. The final sign-off belonged to Dr. Evan Rusk. A low murmur moved through the hangar. It did not become loud. It did not need to. Everyone understood what they were seeing. The man who had dismissed the vibration notes redirected the investigation, accused Arthur of contamination, and recommended replacing the wrong module, had also approved the refit record containing the very shortcut now exposed in the right wing. Rusk's face lost color. Julian turned toward him, not with moral outrage, but with the fury of a man discovering that the person beside him might become expensive. For Julian, the danger was not yet the passengers who could have flown on that aircraft. It was not the mechanics nearly blamed for a decision above them. It was liability. Headlines, canceled orders, investors. The possibility that the old man he stepped over would become the most credible person in the building. Before Julian could reshape the moment, the hangar doors opened. Helena Cross entered with 2 safety committee investigators and a legal observer. Helena did not move quickly, yet everyone made space for her. Authority looks different when it does not need to perform. Mara had sent her the inspection photo through a protected reporting channel minutes earlier, along with a note that Arthur's predicted sequence had been reproduced. Helena had spent years watching companies turn warnings into paperwork, and paperwork into delay. She knew enough to come in person. Julian tried to greet her with controlled surprise. He began explaining that the situation was complicated, that unauthorized access had disrupted the investigation, and that Mercer Aerotech was handling the matter internally. Helena listened with the patience of someone allowing a man to build his own trap out loud. Then she looked at the screen. The vibration trace remained displayed. The archived photo remained beside it. Rusk's approval line sat beneath the enlarged image. The open panel remained visible near the right wing. No speech could make those things disappear. Helena asked why the aircraft had been prepared for another test after repeated flight control lockouts. She asked why the vibration concern had not been elevated after the first week. She asked why a non-conforming bracket image had been marked, resolved without formal deviation documentation. She asked why the person who approved the refit had not disclosed the relevance of that approval during the troubleshooting investigation. Nobody answered quickly. That was answer enough. Julian tried to argue that grounding the aircraft without full executive review would create unnecessary panic and damage a major international sale. Helena told him that panic was not caused by grounding an unsafe aircraft. Panic was caused by pretending it was safe because the contract was large. The sentence landed like a verdict. She grounded the Meridian X7 immediately. No taxi test, no demonstration flight, no replacement of the hydraulic module until the right-wing structure, bracket seat, feedback harness, and isolation valve were independently inspected. Helena Cross ordered all refit records preserved, all footage secured, and all personnel involved in the modification separated from the aircraft until formal statements were taken. The Meridian X7 was no longer a luxury product waiting for a buyer. It was evidence. Julian hated that word. Evidence meant the aircraft no longer belonged entirely to his schedule, his public relations team, or his money. Evidence meant order. Evidence meant timestamps. Evidence meant people who were used to being ignored could suddenly become witnesses. He tried to argue that the grounding was premature, that the foreign buyer would interpret it as instability, that the board would demand explanations, that investors would panic. But every objection made him look less like a leader protecting an aircraft and more like a man protecting a sale. Helena did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She reminded him that an aircraft with repeated control warnings, unexplained vibration traces, and a documented refit anomaly did not fly simply because a billionaire needed it to. The hangar listened to her because she spoke the way safety is supposed to sound. Calm, precise, and completely unmoved by pressure. Mara stood several feet away, still holding the printed inspection photo. Her hands had stopped trembling, but her face had not recovered. She knew she had crossed lines. She knew a canceled badge and an old corridor would not look clean in any official report. But she also knew what would have happened if she had gone back to her desk and let Rusk replace the hydraulic module first. The real fault would have been hidden beneath a false repair, and the next clean test might have become the most dangerous one. Helena seemed to understand that. She did not excuse the access breach, but she protected Mara as a reporting witness. That detail angered Julian almost as much as the grounding. He wanted someone punished quickly. Punishment could have helped him control the story. If Mara was reckless, then Arthur was a trespasser. If Arthur was a trespasser, then the evidence was contaminated. If the evidence was contaminated, then the aircraft could return to the language Julian preferred. Internal review, proprietary assessment, and temporary irregularity. Helena denied him that escape. Arthur listened without expression. He was not celebrating. His eyes remained on the aircraft. To him, the meridian had not been fixed. It had only been heard. Men like Julian loved moments of public victory or defeat. Mechanics cared about what the machine would do tomorrow. A grounded aircraft was safer than a flying lie, but it was still a problem waiting to be understood completely. Dr. Rusk was placed on temporary administrative restriction pending review. He requested counsel almost immediately. He gathered his folder with careful hands and avoided looking at Arthur as he left the hangar floor. That avoidance told Arthur more than any confession could have. Rusk was not a man surprised by the evidence. He was a man surprised that evidence had survived. As the hangar began to clear, Helena approached Arthur. For the first time that day, someone with authority asked him who he was before deciding what he was. Arthur gave his name. Helena repeated it softly, and something shifted in her expression. She knew the name. Not from Mercer's current staff list, not from the borrowed badge on his jacket, but from an old aviation safety file that had never fully settled. Arthur Vale. Project Larkspur. The past, which Arthur had spent years trying to survive rather than explain, rose into the room. Helena asked whether he had worked on Larkspur 16 years earlier. Arthur confirmed it, but he did not offer the story. He had no desire to open that wound in front of Julian, Rusk's legal shadow, and half a hangar of people who had laughed at him before lunch. But Helena already understood enough. Years earlier, an independent review had questioned parts of the Larkspur finding, though the record had never been fully reopened because key raw data was missing and the original company had collapsed into asset transfers. Arthur's hand tightened around the toolbox handle. For 16 years, the official world had treated him as a concluded matter, a failed mechanic, a revoked license, a cautionary footnote. Now someone was saying the conclusion had been questioned, not in rumors, but in review. Did not feel like triumph. It felt like grief arriving late with documents in its hands. Mara looked from Helena to Arthur and understood that the old man's connection to the Meridian was deeper than instinct. The failure inside the modern jet was echoing the failure that had destroyed his life. Helena ordered her team to pull every Mercer archive connected to Larkspur-derived architecture. Julian objected immediately, using words like proprietary limits, acquisition complexity, and irrelevant history. Helena did not argue emotionally. She simply stated that if Larkspur-derived systems appeared in the Meridian X7's control feedback design, then historical warnings were relevant to an active grounding. That ended the objection for the moment. But the real fight had only begun. Mercer Aerotech became quieter, and that quiet worried Mara more than shouting would have. The public relations team drafted careful language about a temporary safety pause. Legal counsel began separating documents into categories. Executives stopped speaking freely in hallways. Mechanics who had been ignored for weeks suddenly found their old notes requested by investigators. The hangar was no longer only a place where a jet had failed. It was a place where blame was being assigned, and everyone understood that powerful people would try to send it downward if they could. Arthur was taken to a glass conference room for a formal statement. The room had a long table, polished walls, and framed photographs of Mercer aircraft in perfect flight. Arthur sat at one end with his toolbox on the floor beside him. A security manager suggested removing it. Helena quietly told him not to. She may not have understood every tool in that box, but she understood enough to know that some objects are not weapons. They are the last proof of a life other people tried to erase. Mara sat nearby, pale but steady. She knew her job might not survive. She also knew that if Arthur had been right about the aircraft, then bringing him inside had not been recklessness. It had been the only reason the truth reached the panel before the false repair did. The questions began with what Arthur heard at the fence, what he predicted before the second test, what he saw in the refit photo, and what he found in the open panel. He did not exaggerate. He did not insult anyone. He described sequence, cause, and effect. That calm made his testimony stronger. Men who lie often decorate their stories. Arthur had spent a lifetime around machines, and machines punish decoration. One thing happens, then another thing happens. Because of it, the order matters. Then Julian's counsel asked about his revoked certification. There it was, the old stain placed carefully on the table. Arthur answered truthfully. His certification had been revoked after the Larkspur accident. He had appealed briefly, then stopped when his wife became ill, and the cost of fighting exceeded anything they had left. The official report blamed maintenance oversight, though Arthur had maintained from the beginning that the control feedback anomaly began before the event cited against him. Julian's counsel did not need to accuse him of anything new. The old accusation was useful enough. In corporate rooms, a damaged record can be used like smoke. It does not have to prove guilt. It only has to make people squint. Mara could not stay silent. She explained that Arthur identified the wing route before he entered the facility, before he accessed the records, before he opened the panel, and before anyone showed him the Larkspur reference. She explained that his warning about the hydraulic isolation valve came before the new warning appeared. She explained that the archived photo proved the shim existed long before Arthur was anywhere near the aircraft. Her voice shook at first, but facts steadied it. Julian accused her of emotional judgment. He suggested she had been manipulated by sympathy for a stranger. He reminded the room that she was not a mechanic, not an engineer, and not qualified to interpret aircraft systems. It was a cruel tactic because it dressed decency as incompetence. Arthur looked at him then. He did not raise his voice. He simply said that Mara had done what every safety manual claimed employees should do. She escalated a credible concern when the normal chain failed. If Mercer punished her for that, then the aircraft was not the only broken system in the building. For several seconds, no one spoke. Julian looked away first. That small movement did not restore Arthur's name. It did not fix the aircraft. It did not end the investigation. But everyone in the room felt the balance shift. The old man had not defended himself with anger. He had defended the person with less power. That is often how real character appears, not when victory is certain, but when punishment is still possible. By evening, the first version of the public story began leaking. Mercer's communications team tried to control it. They released a statement about an isolated configuration irregularity and a temporary safety review. They did not mention Arthur Vale. They did not mention the shim. They did not mention Julian's mockery at the fence or Rusk's attempt to turn the discovery into a sabotage concern. Companies often begin lying not by saying what is false, but by choosing which truths never enter the sentence. Then a financial news site published a harsher version, citing unnamed sources who claimed the Meridian investigation had been complicated by the involvement of a disgraced, former mechanic, tied to an old aviation accident. The article questioned Arthur's credibility. It described Mara's actions as unauthorized. It suggested internal experts were concerned about contamination, personal motives, and interference with proprietary systems. Arthur read the article on Mara's phone in silence. His name was once again attached to disgrace. For 16 years, he had lived under an official conclusion he could not afford to fight. The words were not new, but they cut differently now, because, for one day, he had allowed himself to believe truth might arrive cleanly. He should have known better. Truth often has to pass through mud before anyone admits it is water. Mara apologized, though she had not written the article. Arthur told her the company was doing what companies do when the witness is more dangerous than the failure. They could not yet defeat the evidence, so they were attacking the person who found it. But Julian had forgotten about his own cameras. Mercer Aerotech recorded nearly everything inside Hangar 12. The cameras had been installed to monitor workers, reduce liability, and protect company property. They recorded Arthur at the fence. They recorded Julian mocking him. They recorded the guards dragging him away. They recorded the tools spilling and the brass mirror sliding across the concrete. They recorded Arthur predicting the hydraulic warning before the second test. They recorded Rusk resisting the vibration trace, the archived photo on the screen, and the moment the room saw Rusk's approval line. The system designed to watch workers had watched the executives too. Mara knew where the safety archive copies were stored. Before her access could be fully restricted, she sent Helena the camera labels and timestamps through the protected reporting line. It was not a leak, it was preservation. There is a difference between exposing a company for entertainment and protecting evidence before powerful people can make it disappear. That night, Arthur returned to the small rented room above an old appliance repair shop where he lived. He had no real home in the way people meant the word. The room held a narrow bed, a hot plate, 2 shirts hanging from a pipe, old maintenance manuals, and a window that rattled whenever aircraft passed overhead. For years, the sound of planes had been both comfort and punishment. He could not stop listening to them, even after the world told him he no longer had the right to work on them. He placed the toolbox on the bed and opened it. The brass inspection mirror lay inside, scratched at the edges, its surface dulled by years of use. Arthur wiped it clean. In the mirror, he saw not only the tool, but the moment Julian stepped over it. He thought of Evelyn then, as he often did when a day wounded him more deeply than he wanted to admit. Evelyn had been the one person who never believed the official report. She had written letters, saved documents, and reminded him that losing a license did not mean losing the truth. Near the end of her illness, when Arthur had stopped fighting because medicine mattered more than lawyers, she told him that machines had always known who he was, even when men forgot. Arthur had not opened the storage box she left behind in years. Now he pulled it from the closet. Inside were old envelopes, faded photographs, unpaid medical notices he had never been able to throw away, and one small notebook wrapped in cloth. Arthur recognized it immediately. His shop notebook from the Larkspur years. He had thought it was lost. Maybe part of him had wanted to think that, because losing it hurt less than admitting he had been afraid to open the past. Between the pages, Evelyn had tucked a letter. Arthur unfolded it slowly. She had written it near the end, when her handwriting had begun to weaken, but her mind remained sharp. She told him that if the truth ever found him again, he should not turn away because of her. She knew he had chosen her care over the legal fight, and she did not want that choice to become another prison. She wrote that love was not the same as surrender. She wrote that if his name could still be restored someday, he should let it be restored. Arthur read the letter twice. For years, he had believed that choosing Evelyn over the appeal meant accepting the lie forever. Her words released him from a guilt he had carried so quietly that even he had stopped naming it. The dead cannot return what was stolen, but sometimes they can give the living permission to want it back. The notebook was rough, stained, and full of hand-drawn diagrams. It contained warnings about vibration-induced false feedback in lightweight control structures. It described dampening brackets, preload checks, harness clearance, and the danger of relying only on static testing when vibration was the real trigger. One phrase appeared more than once in Arthur's cramped handwriting. A bracket seated wrong can make the machine hear a ghost. The next morning, Helena's team found the first matching Larkspur file in Mercer's archive. It was an old technical memo, transferred during an acquisition years earlier. The memo described the same danger in cleaner language. It warned that a shimmed bracket could create a hidden path for vibration and make a control system believe a stabilizer had moved when it had not. Arthur read it in silence. The words were formal, but the thought beneath them was painfully familiar. Some of it had come from him. Years earlier, before the Larkspur accident, Arthur had written practical warnings after late-night tests. Engineers had laughed at his phrasing and then used the idea because it was right. After the accident, many of his notes disappeared from the official record. Now, similar warnings existed inside Mercer's archive without his name attached. Mara watched his face and understood the theft before he explained it. They had not only blamed him for failing to catch a danger he had warned them about. Somewhere along the chain, they had preserved his insight, stripped away his name, built new technology from it, ignored its limits, and then nearly blamed him again when the old danger returned. That kind of injustice is not merely professional. It is intimate. A man can steal your tool and leave you angry. But when they steal your warning, erase your name, and later punish you for recognizing the danger first, they are trying to decide who is allowed to speak reality itself. The first video clip appeared online later that day. It was short, shaky, and recorded by someone outside the service road. It showed Arthur being dragged from the fence while people inside the hangar laughed. The audio was poor, but Julian's posture was unmistakable. Viewers did not know the full story yet, but they saw enough to become curious. Why had a billionaire aviation CEO mocked an old man near a grounded jet? Why had the demonstration been canceled afterward? Why did the old man protect his toolbox like it held the last pieces of his life? Mercer's attempt to bury Arthur began to fail because curiosity does not obey press releases. Then the longer safety footage reached Helena's investigators. Within hours, the internal narrative collapsed further. The footage proved Arthur warned them before the new failure appeared. It proved Rusk resisted the test that confirmed the sequence. It proved Julian treated a safety warning as an insult because it came from the wrong kind of person. And when news of the archived photo spread inside the company, mechanics who had stayed silent began remembering things aloud. One refit technician admitted he had questioned the shim 6 months earlier. Another remembered being told the deviation was resolved above his level. Cal Benton submitted a statement acknowledging that workers had been trained, not formally, but culturally, to stop writing concerns once leadership signaled impatience. None of them claimed innocence in a perfect way. That made their statements more believable. They had been afraid, They had been tired. They had survived by staying quiet. Now the aircraft had shown them what silence almost cost. Rusk was placed on formal suspension pending investigation. Julian did not defend him publicly. He began to distance himself with the speed of a man recognizing a sacrifice. He spoke of accountability, internal review, and his disappointment that critical information had not reached him clearly. But the cameras had already shown him ignoring the warning when it reached him in the plainest possible form. An old mechanic at the fence telling him where the fault lived. Rusk understood he was being prepared as the offering. That made him dangerous. Through counsel, he began producing emails showing the pressure Julian had placed on the Meridian team to maintain the demonstration schedule. None of the messages ordered anyone to install a shim or bury a warning. Men like Julian rarely write orders that way. They create conditions. They praise speed. They question delays. They make careers depend on impossible timelines, then act surprised when someone below them cuts a corner. Rusk's defense was not moral. It was survival. But survival has a way of dragging hidden truths into daylight. The two powerful men who had protected the same polished story began cutting each other with it. And then, late that night, Arthur received a phone call. The voice belonged to Raymond Sloan, a retired data analyst who had worked on the original Larkspur investigation. He was old now, thinner than Arthur remembered, his voice worn down by years of silence. Raymond said he had seen the news. He had seen Arthur's face. He had seen the phrase Project Larkspur return to public conversation. And for the first time in 16 years, silence felt heavier than fear. Arthur said nothing. Raymond continued anyway. During the original investigation, he had helped convert raw flight telemetry into simplified event timelines for the review board. The official summary blamed maintenance oversight. But the raw data, Raymond said, showed something different. The control feedback anomaly began before the maintenance event Arthur was blamed for failing to catch. In plain terms, the aircraft had started lying to itself before Arthur could have caused the chain they placed on him. Raymond had copied the raw data and hidden it. Fear had kept him silent. Guilt had kept him from destroying it. Arthur closed his eyes. For 16 years, he had imagined this moment in 100 different ways. He had imagined anger, shouting, relief, vindication. But when it came, he felt almost still. The body, after carrying pain long enough, sometimes receives impossible news, as if it is simply too tired to react. He did not forgive Raymond on that call. Forgiveness is not a switch old pain turns on because someone finally tells the truth. But he agreed to meet him because the data mattered more than the apology. The copy was held in a safe deposit box in Cincinnati under the name of Raymond's late sister. Helena arranged for an investigator to accompany them because chain of custody mattered now. The evidence had to be clean enough to survive the lawyers Julian Mercer could afford. Arthur traveled with Mara. In his jacket pocket, he carried Evelyn's letter. At his feet, as always, sat the blue toolbox. He did not need the tools for the meeting. He brought them because they were the only witnesses that had never left him. Raymond met them in a public library, older than Arthur remembered, bent inward by cowardice and regret. He did not ask for easy forgiveness. He explained what he had done, how the raw sequence differed from the summary, how his supervisor had pressured him to treat the anomaly as inconclusive, and how he convinced himself that reopening the matter would destroy his family without saving Arthur. Arthur listened. He saw a man who had failed him. He also saw a man finally bringing forward the one thing powerful people had kept hidden. Human beings, Arthur knew, were more complicated than machines. Machines fail according to conditions. People fail according to fear. At the bank, the safe deposit box contained an old data cartridge, a printed index, and a letter from Raymond explaining why he had preserved it. The cartridge looked too small to carry the weight placed upon it. But Arthur knew small things could change everything. A shim, a wire, a missing line of data, a truth kept alive in the dark. Helena's team extracted the telemetry with help from a specialist who could still read the obsolete format. The process took hours. Arthur waited in a small municipal aviation office with Mara beside him, staring at a framed picture of an aircraft lifting into a blue sky. He wondered how many beautiful machines had carried ugly secrets, because men on the ground were too proud to stop them. When Helena entered, she did not look triumphant. That told Arthur the truth had weight. The raw data confirmed Raymond's claim. The Larkspur control feedback anomaly began before the event cited against Arthur. The original report had not merely simplified the timeline, it had reversed its meaning. Arthur's maintenance oversight had been used as the clean explanation for a deeper design and vibration issue that management did not want to own. For 16 years, the report had treated him like the first failure in the chain. Now the machine from his past had finally spoken, and the report had reversed cause and effect. For years, Arthur had imagined that proof would feel like freedom. Instead, the first feeling was grief. He sat in the municipal aviation office with the raw telemetry summary on the table, and for several seconds, he could not move. The room around him seemed too clean for the truth it now contained. Fluorescent lights hummed above him. Mara sat beside him. Helena stood near the window with the expression of a woman who understood that official words could not return stolen years. Arthur thought of Evelyn. He saw her at the kitchen table, opening letters from agencies that never answered honestly. He saw the house they sold, when medical bills grew faster than hope. He saw the certification notice that ended the only work he had ever truly loved. He saw the faces of employers who read his record and became polite in the way people become polite when they have already decided no. He saw the apprentices he never trained, the aircraft he never signed off, and the nights when he woke, hearing alarms from a storm he had not caused. Proof did not give those years back. It only proved that the pain had been telling the truth. Mara placed her hand gently over his. This time, Arthur let it stay. Helena explained that the old Larkspur finding would not be overturned in a single afternoon. Institutions moved slowly, especially when admitting an old error meant admitting that real people had lived beneath it. But the evidence was now too strong to ignore. Arthur's notebook, Raymond's raw telemetry, the Mercer archive, Rusk's approval record, the Meridian X7 failure, the shimmed bracket, the rubbed harness, and the hangar footage all pointed in the same direction. A warning had been made. A warning had been buried. A system had been built from the buried warning. And when the same danger returned, the same kind of men had tried to bury the mechanic again. This time, they were too late. The deeper story broke the next morning. Nina Patel, an aviation safety journalist known for careful reporting rather than loud scandal, published the first full account. She did not write Arthur as a fairy tale hero or Julian as a simple villain. She explained the failure sequence, the physical evidence inside the right wing, the archived refit photo, the vibration trace, the Larkspur connection, Raymond's raw data, and the culture that allowed technical concerns to become inconvenient noise. Her headline described Arthur as the mechanic who heard the failure before the screens understood it. That line traveled everywhere. Pilots shared it. Mechanics shared it. Safety inspectors debated it. Aviation students began mapping the timeline. Ordinary people did not understand every detail of dampening brackets or feedback harnesses, but they understood the image of an old man at a fence, warning experts, being laughed away, and then being proven right by the very aircraft they said he had no right to approach. They understood Julian stepping over the mirror. That image became the symbol of the entire scandal. A billionaire stepping over the tool of the man who would save his aircraft. A company stepping over experience. An industry stepping over a warning because the person giving it looked poor, old, and inconvenient. Mercer Aerotech could no longer control the story. Julian tried it first. He released a statement praising the safety review and claiming the company had acted with caution once new information emerged. But the footage made those words look thin. The cameras showed Arthur's warning. They showed Julian's mockery. They showed the guards pulling him away. They showed Rusk resisting the simple test. They showed Julian objecting to the grounding because of the demonstration schedule. It was difficult to claim caution when the world had watched you treat caution like an insult. The buyer suspended the fleet order. Regulators demanded records. Investors demanded leadership accountability. The board, which had once celebrated Julian's speed and confidence, now spoke in colder words. Governance, risk, oversight, exposure. Men like Julian often discover too late that the people who praise arrogance during profit will rename it recklessness during crisis. Rusk fell first. Investigators recovered the private message he believed had disappeared. It had survived in an automatic backup attached to a project management export. In that message, Rusk had discouraged formal deviation language about the shimmed bracket because it could trigger structural review and create schedule exposure. The phrase was polite, corporate, and damning. It showed exactly how danger becomes paperwork when the wrong person is trying to protect a calendar. Rusk was terminated for cause and referred for regulatory investigation. His professional reputation, built on precision and authority, began cracking beneath his own words. He had spent his career sounding careful. Now everyone could see that careful language had been used to hide careless judgment. Julian tried to make Rusk the entire scandal. He described himself as misled by advanced systems leadership. He spoke of disappointment. He promised reform. He praised the employees who had helped identify the concern, carefully avoiding the fact that one of those employees had to bring Arthur through an unofficial route because the official chain had failed. But Rusk, facing ruin, refused to become the only sacrifice. Through counsel, he produced emails showing Julian's repeated pressure to keep the demonstration flight on schedule despite unresolved modification concerns. None of the emails ordered anyone to commit misconduct in plain language. They did something more familiar and harder to prosecute. They created pressure. They rewarded speed. They punished delay. They made everyone understand what kind of truth leadership preferred. The two men who had once protected the same polished story began cutting each other with pieces of it. That was poetic justice, not because it was loud, but because it was exact. For years inside Mercer Aerotech, pressure had flowed downward. Executives demanded impossible timelines. Managers softened warnings. Mechanics carried the risk. Now the pressure flowed upward. The records used to control workers became evidence against executives. The cameras installed to monitor the hangar became witnesses against its owner. The old Larkspur files that erased Arthur's name became proof that his warning had outlived the people who stole it. While the powerful fought, the mechanics repaired the aircraft. The Meridian X7 remained grounded under independent oversight. Its right-wing panels were open, its harnesses were tagged, its bracket was removed. Its structure was lit by inspection lamps. Without the polished skin hiding its inner spaces, the aircraft looked less like a luxury object and more like what every aircraft truly is. A promise made out of metal, wire, pressure, tolerance, and trust. Arthur returned to Hangar 12 as an official technical witness. No one laughed this time. Cal Benton met him near the right-wing route. Shame sat plainly on the older mechanic's face. He had laughed at the fence. He had stayed quiet during the refit. He had survived in Mercer's culture by learning when not to challenge authority. Arthur did not demand an apology. He had little use for apology unless it changed what happened next. Cal understood that. He explained the repair plan with a humility that had not existed in the hangar before. The shim would be removed. The bracket seat would be restored and measured properly. The control feedback harness would be replaced and rerouted with correct clearance. The secondary hydraulic isolation valve would be inspected for stress from repeated false commands. The entire feedback loop would be recalibrated under staged vibration load, not only static conditions. Every aircraft that had received the same modification package would be inspected before returning to service. Arthur listened. He did not take over. He did not touch anything he was not authorized to touch. He had already been punished once by a world eager to blur technical truth with procedural accusation. This time, he remained careful. Licensed technicians performed the work. Arthur observed, asked questions, and gave advice only when invited. But everyone in the hangar felt the standard change around him. A young engineer asked whether the bracket preload should be verified again after the first vibration cycle, rather than only before panel closure. Arthur almost broke then. Not when Julian insulted him. Not when Rusk was exposed. Not when the raw data confirmed his old warning. But when a young engineer listened to his practical concern and wrote it down without making him prove that his experience deserved space on the page. Respect, when denied long enough, can feel almost unbearable when it finally returns. The repair took 2 days. They ran the vibration trace before closing the panel, then again after closing it, then again after the first controlled system cycle. The ghost signal did not return. The feedback channel stayed clean. The hydraulic isolation response remained stable. The bleed air spike vanished because it had never been the disease. It had only been the echo. On the final ground test, Hangar 12 filled with people and silence. The engine started. The sound rose smoothly through the space. Arthur stood several feet behind the main line with his toolbox at his feet, one hand resting lightly on the handle. He listened not for power, but for absence. The wrong pulse was gone. The right-wing route no longer carried that faint, false rhythm he had heard from outside the fence. The thrust increased through the range where the failure had always appeared. No stabilizer warning. No hydraulic dip. No thermal spike. No lockout. The Meridian X7 did not announce that it had been healed. It simply behaved. A quiet cheer moved through the hangar. Mechanics shook hands. Engineers exhaled. Mara covered her mouth with one hand. Cal looked down and wiped his face as if no one could see him. Helena watched Arthur, understanding that the moment belonged to him more than any press release would ever admit. Arthur did not smile broadly. His relief was deeper than expression. For the first time in 16 years, he had helped bring an aircraft back to truth in front of witnesses who could not erase him. The successful test did not save Julian. It made his position worse. If the aircraft had remained mysterious, he might have hidden behind complexity. But the fix proved Arthur had been right from the beginning. It proved the problem had not required weeks of executive theater, millions in unnecessary parts, or attacks on a poor old mechanic. It required opening the correct panel, respecting the first warning, and listening to someone who understood machines without needing permission from a billionaire. The board announced that Julian Mercer would step aside pending an independent governance review. They did not call it removal. Men with money often receive softer words on the way down than working people receive while falling. But everyone understood. Julian had built an empire on speed, image, and control. He lost control because a machine refused to carry his pride into the sky. Mara's suspension was lifted. More than that, Helena recommended her for a newly created protected escalation role, ensuring that non-engineering staff could raise safety concerns without being crushed by chain-of-command politics. Some executives called it an overcorrection. Helena called it overdue. Mara accepted, not because she wanted praise, but because she knew how close she had come to staying silent. She wanted the next person with a warning to have a better door than the one she had been forced to break open. The refit technicians who had raised concerns were cleared. Cal Benton submitted a statement, admitting that the hangar culture had trained workers to survive by becoming quiet. It was not an easy statement to write. It made him look weak in places, but it saved younger workers from carrying blame that belonged above them. And that was the first honest thing he had done in too long. Then came Arthur's hearing. The Aviation Authority reopened the Larkspur findings based on the raw telemetry, Raymond's testimony, Arthur's notebook, the Mercer archive, and the Meridian failure. It was not a grand courtroom moment. It was a modest regulatory office with a long table, cautious language, and people who understood that admitting an old mistake could embarrass institutions that preferred their past to remain settled. Arthur wore a dark jacket Mara helped him choose. He carried the toolbox anyway. No one asked him to. He brought it because some part of him needed the tools nearby when the world finally reconsidered the hands that had held them. Evelyn's letter rested in his inside pocket. Helena testified first about the Meridian failure and the Larkspur connection. Raymond testified next, older and shaken, explaining how the raw data had been reduced into a misleading summary and how fear kept him silent. Mara testified about the day at the fence, about Arthur's warning, about the decision to bring him inside, and about the way the aircraft proved the warning before the company accepted it. Cal submitted his statement, describing the repair and Arthur's diagnostic accuracy. Arthur spoke last. He did not ask the panel to pretend he had been perfect. He did not want a fairy tale. He wanted the sequence restored. He described the vibration concerns, the bracket preload warnings, the missing notes, the test night conditions, the raw data he requested but never received, and the official summary that placed cause after consequence and then called it truth. He spoke of Evelyn only briefly because grief was not evidence, but it was part of the cost. He explained that losing his certification had not only ended a job, it had removed him from the one language he had known since boyhood. The panel listened. Arthur had once spoken to rooms that were already closed against him. This room was not fully open, but it was no longer locked. When the questioning ended, the panel deliberated. Arthur waited in the hallway with Mara on one side and his toolbox on the floor beside his shoes. He did not pace. He had done enough waiting in his life to know that movement did not hurry judgment. Still, every minute carried the weight of 16 years. When the decision came, it arrived in careful language, as institutional truth often does. The original Larkspur finding would be amended. The agency acknowledged that the report had overemphasized maintenance oversight, while failing to properly account for vibration-induced control feedback anomalies that preceded the cited maintenance event. Arthur Vale's documented warnings would be added to the record. His professional standing would be restored for historical review purposes. His revoked certification, long expired under the original finding, would be reinstated in honorary status, with eligibility for supervised renewal if he chose to pursue it. The agency expressed regret. Regret. Such a small word for 16 years. Arthur lowered his head. Mara looked away to give him privacy. Helena did the same. Raymond covered his face at the far end of the hallway. Arthur thought of Evelyn, and grief arrived with gratitude tangled inside it. He wished she could have heard the decision. He wished it had come before the illness, before the house was gone, before shame became part of the air they breathed. But the truth had come at last. Late, wounded, imperfect, but real. And because it had come, the lie would not be the final thing written beside his name. Reporters waited outside the building. Some wanted anger. Some wanted revenge. Some wanted Arthur to condemn Julian, Rusk, the agency, and everyone who had failed him. But Arthur had spent enough of his life being used in other people's stories. He would not turn his pain into entertainment just because cameras had arrived. He spoke instead about listening. He said safety was not created by confidence. It was created by attention. It came from mechanics, technicians, inspectors, coordinators, and every person close enough to notice when something felt wrong. He reminded them that a machine does not care about titles, wealth, reputation, or pride. If a bracket is seated wrong, it is wrong. If a signal is false, it is false. If a warning comes from an old man at a fence, the warning does not become less true because the man's jacket is worn. That evening, the longer footage of Julian stepping over Arthur's fallen mirror was shown in a documentary segment about the Meridian scandal. The image became a symbol almost immediately. The public loved it because poetic justice is easier to understand when it fits in a single frame. Arthur saw something quieter. He saw the mirror. The next morning, he sat at the little table in his rented room and polished the brass inspection mirror with a soft cloth. Its surface was scratched. Its edges were worn. It did not reflect perfectly, but it reflected honestly enough. That had always been its purpose. It did not make hidden spaces beautiful. It made them visible. A week later, Mercer Aerotech invited Arthur back to Hangar 12. Not as a public relations ornament, though some people certainly wanted to use him that way. Helena made sure the invitation had substance. The company was creating a training program on practical fault recognition, safety escalation, and the danger of dismissing worker concerns. The young mechanics had asked for Arthur by name. He almost refused. The hangar still carried the echo of laughter. The fence, the guards, Julian's shoe stepping over the mirror, Rusk's sabotage accusation, all of it still lived there. But Mara reminded him that places do not become clean because good people leave them. They become clean when someone teaches the next generation not to repeat what happened there. Arthur returned. On his first morning as a training consultant, he stood beside an opened airframe in front of a group of apprentices. Some had degrees. Some had grease under their nails already. Some were young enough to believe modern diagnostics would catch every danger before human hands needed to. Arthur did not shame them for that. He opened his toolbox and placed the brass mirror on the bench. Then he placed Evelyn's letter beside it, folded closed, not for them to read, but for himself to remember why truth must be defended before people are forced to spend their lives proving they deserved it. He began with a simple lesson. A bracket can look seated and still be wrong. A harness can test clean and still lie under vibration. A screen can show symptoms without showing origin. A room full of experts can miss what one careful person hears, if the room has already decided who is worth listening to. The apprentices leaned forward. Arthur lifted the mirror and angled it into the dark space behind the training panel. In the small reflection, they saw what direct sight could not show. Hidden brackets, tight clearances, a road where vibration might travel. Nothing dramatic, nothing glowing red. Just the kind of ordinary place where danger waits when pride moves too fast. Arthur told them never to trust a closed panel simply because someone powerful was tired of waiting. Cal stood at the back of the room, listening. Mara stood near the door, now officially responsible for making sure warnings had a path. Helena watched from the corridor for a moment, then walked away without interrupting. The best reforms are not always announced. Sometimes they are practiced quietly until they become normal. Months passed. The Meridian X7 returned to service only after independent verification. Other aircraft touched by the same modification package were inspected. New reporting protections were created. Concern logs could no longer be buried by one executive's preference. Safety meetings began with uncomfortable questions instead of polished confidence. Julian disappeared from daily leadership. Rusk's case moved through regulators. Mercer Aerotech survived, but it did not survive unchanged. The company learned, painfully, that the cost of listening early is always smaller than the cost of being forced to listen later. Arthur never became rich. He did not want to. He did not move into a large house or become a celebrity expert with a glossy office. He kept the small room for a while, then accepted a modest apartment closer to the training facility because his knees were getting worse, and Mara insisted the stairs were trying to kill him. He complained about the move, but not very convincingly. On quiet evenings, he still heard aircraft pass overhead. The sound no longer punished him. Sometimes it reminded him of Evelyn. Sometimes it reminded him of the years that were gone. But sometimes, more often than before, it sounded like work still worth doing. One afternoon, after a training session, a young apprentice stayed behind. He was nervous, holding a report form in both hands. He told Arthur he had noticed a tiny vibration during a bench test, but he was not sure it meant anything. He was afraid of wasting everyone's time. Arthur looked at the form, then at the young man. For a moment, he saw himself decades earlier, standing in a room where his warning was treated as inconvenience. He saw the fence. He saw the mirror on the concrete. He saw Julian's polished shoe stepping over it. Then he looked at the apprentice and handed him a pen. He told him uncertainty was exactly where safety begins. The apprentice wrote the concern down. It turned out to be minor, a loose mount, easy to fix, no scandal, no headlines, no billionaire losing control in front of cameras. Just a small warning caught early, because someone had been taught not to stay silent. Arthur considered that one of the greatest victories of his life, because justice is not only when the powerful fall, Sometimes justice is when the next frightened person speaks sooner. Years later, people would still tell the story of the old mechanic at the fence. They would talk about the billionaire, the private jet, the hidden shim, the raw data, the exposed executive, and the mirror on the ground. They would call it unbelievable because people like stories where arrogance is punished and truth returns at the perfect moment. Arthur knew the truth was less perfect than that. Truth had come late. It had left scars. It had not saved Evelyn. It had not returned the house. It had not given him back the strength of his younger hands. But it had returned his name to him. It had changed a hangar. It had taught young workers that warnings do not become worthless because they come from someone without power. And maybe that was enough. On his final day of the first training cycle, Arthur stood inside Hangar 12 near the same fence where he had once been thrown out. The Meridian X7 rested in the distance, quiet and repaired. The brass mirror sat in his toolbox, scratched but clean. Mara joined him for a moment, and neither of them spoke at first. Outside the fence, the concrete looked ordinary. Arthur remembered kneeling there, gathering tools while rich men laughed. He remembered the mirror sliding through the dust. He remembered Julian stepping over it as if it were nothing. Then he looked back into the hangar, where apprentices were now teaching one another how to inspect the hidden places. Mara asked whether he ever got tired of telling the story. Arthur smiled faintly. He said the story was not about him. It was about the warning. Because every machine, every workplace, every family, every life gives warnings before it breaks. Sometimes those warnings come from screens. Sometimes from numbers. Sometimes from a sound no one else notices. And sometimes they come from a person the room has already decided not to respect. The danger is not only missing the warning. The danger is deciding who is allowed to give one. Arthur picked up his toolbox and turned from the fence. He walked back into Hangar 12 slowly, with the same worn jacket, the same tired knees, and the same careful hands. But he no longer walked like a man waiting to be removed. He walked like someone the truth had finally brought home. So if you ever see someone being dismissed because they look too old, too poor, too quiet, or too ordinary to matter, remember Arthur Vale. Remember the aircraft that warned them 3 times. Remember the billionaire who laughed. Remember the mirror on the concrete. And remember this: what you step over may be the very thing that could have saved you.